say your name and spell for me.
Sure. Nathan Small. It's NATHANSMALL.
Cool. All right.
Nathan
and,
Small.
District 4.
District 4, yeah.
Courtesy, I guess.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Could you kind of speak to how effective is the minimum wage enforcement in Las Cruces at the moment?
Absolutely. I think the anecdotal evidence that we receive that most employers are paying the current minimum wage, $8.40 per hour, $3.36 for tipped workers. There were reports, especially at the beginning of the year, that there were some employers where their employees were not getting the proper hourly wage, that it was stuck where it had been last year before the increase. There have been fewer of those reports. I would say that enforcement is anecdotal. It's less than ideal because there's not a direct city enforcement of the ordinance. It's taken to district court, and it's a civil matter. There are other issues, however, that are beginning to appear that may have even more importance than just whether or not employees are being paid the properly hourly wage. Because most reports that I hear now, both from folks from workers and also from those organizations that work closely with workers, some of the more concerning reports have to do with how hours are being structured and issues that lead more into areas of potential wage theft as opposed to improper hourly wage or the hourly wage being too low.
What could you what do you mean with that? And that
Yeah, there's one of the examples that I heard recently was that the lunch breaks are being lengthened, so that is paid time off during the day is being lengthened, but the same amount of workload that is being required. So there's less time on the clock, but the same amount of work. And that, granted, these are at this point anecdotal stories. There's the need, obviously, to investigate, and as we approach the July timeframe when the minimum wage is going to come before the council for assessment, I look forward to bringing some of these examples and hopefully, as I did during the original minimum wage conversation, inviting workers and employees to share their stories so that we can begin to, if we need to, fine-tune whether on the enforcement to add a criminal citation component to the enforcement here in the city, and or to begin looking at other employment issues around those issues of wage theft.
So you're kind of alluding to the fact that by not having a kind of effective criminal element to or criminal enforcement of the minimum wage, that is creating a culture of people kind of flaunting the minimum wage.
There's always the potential for that. What we've seen is that in those instances where employers were not paying the properly hourly wage, or at least reports were coming back that they were not, that dialogue and engagement with the community and with their employees led them to pay that correct wage. So we're seeing less of folks not of flaunting that, and more of some of these troubling issues cropping up around some improper practice or questionable practice about how hours and the like are structured. I do think, though, that not having a criminal component to that municipal enforcement of the municipal ordinance does create at least the potential for what we've seen this in other communities sometimes, where folks say, well, that's the rules, but you can't make me you can't make me follow them. In our city, I'm not aware of those cases that are currently happening right now as of June 2015, 6 months after the minimum wage increased. At the beginning of the year, there were some of those stories. They seem to have been corrected. In July, it's vital that we have open dialogue and safe space for workers, if they're seeing those violations, to certainly report back on that, because that would, I think, be very important evidence that the municipal enforcement, the criminal piece of this, is very important.
Cool. Why wasn't it done in the first place? You told me that this was decided.
Basically, there was the ruling from the city attorney at the time, and I was involved in trying to help bring different parties together. Back in earlier 2014, before the petitions were released for the minimum wage ordinance, which ultimately was adopted and then amended, to even before those petitions would be released, the then city attorney basically required that the enforcement be structured as it currently is, which is that it's a civil matter to be handled in district court.
And what would be the process? Obviously, you're a city councillor, so you're more informed about it than anyone. What would be the process in implementing a criminal enforcement element to the minimum wage enforcement?
What we would be doing is bringing this to that July discussion in a work session format, and ultimately we would craft language amending the current ordinance, if that course is taken, that would either replace or expand the current enforcement options. The separate issue of wage theft or of similar things that are not hourly wage based but rather employment practice based would very likely have to be a separate and standalone ordinance, I believe. That ultimately has to be researched more, presented to the council, and then is subject to of course, the guidance and the opinion of the city legal staff, as it was the last time. Of course, we have some different leadership in that department now, and then would be presented in a public process, multiple steps, at the work session format, the discussion format, and then as we go through that ordinance adoption phase.
So you're basically suggesting that one of the impacts of the minimum wage increase is that some companies are trying to look for ways to make up their losses.
Those are the stories that we hear. Now, want to be clear that in many cases we also hear of other efficiencies. Prices and inputs go up continually for large, mid-size, and small businesses, and nonprofits for that matter as well. So we hear of other innovative steps that are being taken, and the Las Cruces Green Chamber of Commerce, I believe, is actually sponsoring a series of discussions about how to better position businesses in this day and age. So there are certainly those stories of businesses, I think perhaps the silent majority, who are adapting nicely and finding different ways that don't cut back on employee hours, that don't perhaps try to cut corners on employee salaries, but in fact find other ways to both keep their business position and perhaps expand their business position. We do hear of the flip side of that, the more negative side, which is hours. Their hours, of course, can be adjusted, but if there are some potentially unfair practices, like expanding the amount of unpaid time at work, but requiring the same amount of work to be done. In some certain circumstances, those could be crossing lines that are improper and unfair to employees and do need to be addressed.
Cool.
And in fact, there could be other state and or federal remedies. I think it's our responsibility as municipality that has raised the minimum wage to also look at the civil or the municipal enforcement.
Okay, and this is probably the key question. Are you going to propose the minimum wage enforcement measure?
I am going to bring that piece of discussion to the city council. At this point, I'm gathering information, certainly from employers, employees, folks, groups who are in the thick of the conversation from different perspectives as to what the right mechanism is. If we don't want to propose a solution to a problem that doesn't necessarily exist, that is, if folks are paying the hourly wage, then that's great. But if there are other more substantive workplace issues that have begun to show themselves because of the minimum wage increase, then that wage theft piece may be the most important part. However, the municipal enforcement is something I at least intend to bring options to the City Council. We're obviously still a few weeks away from when this discussion takes place, and so that during that time is when we'll determine if it's really important to add that municipal enforcement component, or whether the real issue and challenge is actually on the wage theft side.
Cool. I have spoken to Amicare, and they said that they were going to be there and they would be challenging whether or not they should be paying the minimum wage in their circumstance. I guess would that be a compounding factor in your decision?
Absolutely. If businesses or if folks come to the City Council basically saying that they don't feel they need to pay what is currently the minimum wage, then I think that would be quite compelling evidence that current enforcement, the remedy that's offered, which is only civil, is insufficient. And in fact, the municipal criminal enforcement might very well be necessary to compel those very few entities who choose not to pay something, because that not only punishes their employees, it in effect punishes every other business, large, medium, or small, that chooses to play by the rules. And that's simply unfair to our community in many different ways. So that would be very strong evidence to suggest the municipal enforcement is in fact necessary.
But given like what you just said, shouldn't we just do it anyway to kind of protect the
just to avoid the problem? Potentially, yes. If the solution doesn't create other unintended consequences and forestalls problems from occurring in the future, then absolutely it's important. I don't think it should completely divert our attention nor serve to take the place of continued progress on things of making a city work for employers and a city work for employees. Because if we're doing all these good things for things like workforce development and business recruitment and other pieces of the economic development puzzle, but we have a city where employees are treated improperly in different instances, then that's an issue on the wage theft side that we can't ignore.
But I mean, still, it is a law. What would be the reason not to enforce it or propose it, I guess?
That goes back to, so the law is on the books, and it must be enforced. Right now, the remedy in that enforcement angle is only civil. Adding the criminal municipal piece may require us to change other pieces of the ordinance, and that's the only perhaps potential trade-off, is that if it changes other pieces.
Okay, so could I get a yes or no on the proposal? I guess. Sorry, I didn't put this through.
No, so I'm bringing the municipal enforcement to the council. Whether or not that gets adopted and in what format, that's the piece that we'll be figuring out over the few weeks between now and when this comes before City Council.
Interesting, and that would take in the form of a proposal ordinance, basically.
Right, an ordinance an amendment to the existing minimum wage. I get there's significant importance around around minimum wage and whether employers are paying that. And what we've also brought up in this interview, which I think is very important, are the workplace practices that are as important to perhaps the majority of employees and employers in our community, right? So it would be important to know, are there other employers that our community is aware of that are not paying the current minimum wage? And the example that you bring up, which I think is important, and that coming before council in July is very important. Are there other examples of employers who are not paying the proper hourly wage that you're aware of or that are out there?
I'm not aware of any of them, but I've heard stories as
Right,
well. But
right.
No employer that's literally said that we have.
Sure,
We don't know.
we just choose not to. I think one of the things that does highlight is we need to provide the space within the city council for employees or these stories to make sure and come before the council and the community, right? So we need to find a way to take what's anecdotal and to discuss that and to get that out into the public sphere while protecting folks from retribution or other things.
Is there anything else that's going to be in that proposal that you think we should know about or you'd like to share?
I think it may be as a standalone ordinance, but wage theft is a very important piece, and continually working to address and expand economic opportunity is our largest frame. As a community, we want to expand economic opportunity and expand the economic opportunities for citizens, to attract more businesses, to have a better prepared workforce. A key part of that is making sure when folks go to work in the city that they're being treated right and that the rules, that the playing field is such that they have a fair treatment there at work. Not one piece was the minimum wage that has been addressed. Another piece may be that wage theft. There can be other things. This conversation, it's an ongoing one, and the basic frame is fairness, making sure it's a fair, equitable system, and expanding economic opportunity, making sure that opportunity grows for individuals and for our community as a whole.
Is there anything you'd like to add? You think that needs to be spoken to on this?
I think, not that I can think of right now, but I expect a robust discussion. I expect folks feeling safe coming before council to share their stories, whether as employers or as employees or as community members. And I hope for and expect a council that's focused on these big goals of fairness and of expanding economic opportunity.
Great. And one last thing, I asked a lot of the councillors, they said you're the only councillor that said you were considering introducing this proposal. Given that that's the case, do you think it will get anywhere?
I think the proof is in the pudding. We'll see. There's enforcement and making sure that when the playing field, the rules for the playing field are set, that everybody's playing by those rules. So I would hope that we all want to make good rules and then enforce those rules in a way that's fair for everyone. So I think there'll be a fair hearing, and I think that as this entire conversation has shown, there's many different angles. We've had different groups and constituencies kind of come together at different times. Hopefully, as we move into this next phase, it gives us the general issue of what the wage is going to be and when it will be that, when the consumer price indexing feature goes into effect in 2018. All of those details have been addressed in a sufficient way. Now we look at some of the other details of the issue.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.